Welcome to Chigbu Outbox, the podcast where land meets intellect. From land governance and spatial justice to academic innovation and policy reform, we unpack the complex issues shaping our world. Join us as we challenge conventional thinking, amplify expert voices, and reimagine the role of knowledge in shaping land futures. This is not just a podcast. This is Chigbu Outbox.
Greetings everyone, you're welcome to my Outbox. You know, it's been a while since I interviewed someone, and today I'm just happy to tell you that I'm not just interviewing someone, I'm interviewing people. And amongst the people I'm going to interview today are Professor Mohamed, Salheen, Dr. Merham, Keleg, Dr. Jennilee, Kohima. Now, don't mind the smiles on my face. I'm very happy to have these people here. In fact, in the past 2 days, it's been fun, enjoying dinner with them. But there's a storyline around this before I ask them to introduce themselves. Professor Salheen, I first met him sometime when I was a PhD student at the Technical University of Munich. And in life, you never know. You never know, really, because somehow we are back again as collaborators. But I met him when I was in Technical University of Munich, and one thing that struck me about him, and I just got to, of recent, in the past few months, realize that he was actually the one. He paid a visit to my dear, honorable, excellent Professor Kohima. Those of you that know the Technical University of Munich Department of Land or Chair of Land Management will know him. He paid a visit to Professor Mago, who used to then be the FIG president, and we were doing a PhD seminar, and one of us presented from Uganda, and he arrived as a visitor, and he was asked to review or comment on the presentation. And one of the things he figured out in the presentation was that we were very, 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 very negative about Africa. And all PhD students out there and all those who've passed through this process of research and presentation know that normally we'll be asked to, or it is compulsory that you have to problematize your research. And it was from him that I got to realize that we tend to be very negative when we problematize Africa, because after that presentation he made a comment and he called our attention to the need to be realistic about the issues in Africa rather than simply be negative for the sake of pleasing people out there or for the sake of creating a negative research problem for the sake of research. So, viewers, I want to welcome Professor Salheen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'd like to welcome Professor Keleg. And I'd also like to welcome Dr. Kohima. Yeah, I have to mention, Dr. Keleg doesn't like to be called professor. Okay. And those of you in academia know why. Many assistant professors, associate professors, depending on what region you belong, can have issues with either calling them or not calling them professors. So she doesn't want to be called professor, but sometimes I choose to. Okay, good. So for a start, there's no time, these are very busy people. I would like to start by asking Professor Salheen to introduce himself properly.
I'm Mohamed Salheen. I'm a professor of integrated planning and design at Ain Shams University in Cairo, Egypt, and I'm also currently the head of urban design and planning department at the Faculty of Engineering, and the founder and director of Integrated Urbanism and Sustainable Design program in collaboration with Stuttgart University.
Thank you, Professor Salheen. Thank you. Dr. Keleg.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Merham Keleg and I work as an assistant professor at the Urban Design and Planning Department at Ain Shams University in Cairo, Egypt, and also currently running as the academic coordinator for the master's program of integrated urbanism and sustainable design. This is my official work at the university, but I also have other voluntary positions as a research coordinator for the landscape research group, and also one of the board trustees.
Thank you. Dr. Kohima, please.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Jennilee Kohima. I'm a lecturer here at Namibia University of Science and Technology in the Department of Architecture, Planning and Construction. I also serve as a program coordinator for the postgraduate programs in the spatial planning section.
Thank you, Dr. Kohima. And as you would see, we have two main universities here, the Namibia University of Science and Technology, from where you're listening to us, and the Ain Shams University in Egypt. I'd like to start by, before I delve into the key issues, I'd like to start by saying that I did receive a very beautiful gift from Professor Salheen, and I'm very, very grateful for this. I really appreciate it. So, if you want something like this, you better visit Cairo. Okay, that said, I've also had the opportunity, of visiting the Ain Shams University sometime in December 2024, and I was well hosted by the two individuals on my right and my left, immediate right and left, and so I also like to say thank you very much. I also like to say thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a true, sense of hospitality, an African one, and so I feel even more opportune to have them today in our university and to be talking to them. But there's something that we all share together as scholars, whether big, small, or medium. As African scholars, we have a concern for dealing and tackling problems in Africa. We also have the challenge of making Africa a place of research rather than just a subject of research. And on that basis, I would like by asking, my first question would have been what you do, but it seems like you all have touched on that. Mm-hmm. So I would start by asking the three of you, but starting on my right, Professor Salheen, do you think it's right for myself or maybe other scholars to describe you as an urban scholar?
Yes, and I would maybe add to it an urban scholar and a practitioner. Because I also practice urban planning, urban design and architecture for almost 32 years from now.
Wow, 32 years. Thanks for that. The reason I asked the question is to first and foremost situate my other questions around this. Dr. Keleg, what would you say? Is it all right if I describe you as an urban scholar?
Yeah, I would say generally yes, but also for the sake of some kind of specialization, I would also like to be called more of a landscape scholar, rather than an urban one. But of course, by training, I have a background in architecture, and then more my research into urban design, sustainable development, and landscape research. So it all falls under urban scholar studies, but as a specialization, I would say landscape.
That's quite interesting because there are some keywords that just emerged. Landscape.
Yes.
So you could also be an urban landscape scholar.
Yes.
And you could, what about practitioner?
No, I don't practice, mainly academia.
Okay. But thanks for clearing that up. Dr. Kohima?
Yes, no, definitely. I think by virtue of my academic background and also my industry experience, I consider myself an urban scholar, and because of the little bit of practicing that we do in addition to the academic space, that also aid as an urban practitioner.
That's great. Thanks very much. Now that, I know we've got no issues with urban.
No, it's okay.
Right? Yeah. No, the reason I asked that particular question is also because I personally do not describe myself as an urban scholar. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but obviously I come from land, So I see what I do as something that crisscrosses across urban, rural, peri-urban. And so if I define myself as an urban scholar, it makes it appear as if I'm neglecting the other side. So I just wanted to get that clear. So from your perspective really, because I think I have my perspective, but which doesn't matter at this point. But from your perspective, and this goes to the two of you from the North, what are the main urban challenges in North Africa, and specifically in Cairo? I can start with you.
I think for Cairo, population is around 20 million. Greater Cairo region is slightly over 20 million, and of course, for that you have challenges related to traffic, transportation, housing, jobs, possibly, yes, and green area and open space, availability of green area and open space. I think these are the main challenges that anyone in Cairo would be feeling immediately.
Good. Green space. That reminds me that when I was there, it was quite brown.
Yeah.
I want to say quite brown.
Yeah.
But one thing that was very, very important to me and also crucial is that the sky was blue.
Yeah.
That was great. So, do you have anything to add in terms of the urban challenges in Egypt?
I think they are all interlinked problems and challenges, so you cannot just name one without naming the other, but also all of these pressures as well as the economic pressure, overall economic pressure of whole countries right now, and the country of Egypt. Also added with the need for more housing and, dealing with these challenges, it poses some urban sprawl challenges as well. So this also adds to the complexity of the city and how to link them and how to provide green spaces in a continuously growing city in the desert, which is also another big challenge. Green spaces are needed, but how to provide them in such a complex situation? I think this is one of the most pressing challenges that I usually address.
That's good. Thanks very much. Actually, you kind of punched around the dynamics. I'll sometimes be speaking to at an OECD webinar on urban continuum challenges in Africa. And as you would imagine, coming from the sub-Saharan Africa and not having, my visit to Ain Shams University was my first to get into Egypt and actually see Cairo. And so everything I know about Egypt, even though I've written about Cairo, is been purely from literature. And so this sort of interaction allows me to get firsthand, because when we get out there to speak in conferences or webinars, which you all have the experience, as an African, sometimes you're oversimplifying issues, in Africa because we haven't been everywhere. So thanks for the brief moment of education from the two of you. Before I ask, I put the question to you, Dr. Kohima, I would like to know if you've visited the northern part of Africa or Egypt? Or
No,
okay,
I've not been in that space yet. Hopefully soon.
But in literature, I believe okay. So based on what you know in literature and your experience in the sub-Saharan African region, would you think we have similar problems, urban problems?
I think it's not comparable because of the scale, number one. I think the countries in North Africa, in terms of population, it's also quite big, and they are also rapidly growing countries, and that has an impact on some of the challenges that were mentioned here. But one challenge that might be common in Africa, North Sub-Sahara, would be a housing challenge.
Okay.
And interesting enough, Prof. Salheen did not mention the employment aspect when it came to Egypt now, but I felt that employment is also a cross-cutting challenge for Africa, especially if we look at the skilled sector versus the semi-skilled and unskilled sectors. So employment might be one of those that have a ripple effect, like Keleg said, that there's a complexity that is basically a web if you have to branch out in terms of that.
Thanks very much. I know that when it comes to urbanization in Africa, there are two main problematic cities. One in the west and one in the north. It's Lagos and Cairo. So, so obviously, the problem in Africa is well dispersed. One is on the top and one is at the below. So we definitely share more in commonalities, in similarities together than in differences. So I'm glad that this has been pointed out. I know that my audience are not all scholars, but I would have been able to draw in some urban land scholars, considering that my first interview in this podcast was with Geoffrey Payne, who is a notable world urban land management scholar and practitioner. And today we have scholars and we have a practitioner as well, and they combined. I'm saying this because I believe that some people out there would like us to identify maybe one specific problem and maybe a strategy and approach for resolving such a problem. So I would like to ask, starting with Professor Salheen, if you can identify a specific problem, urban problem in Cairo, and your view of an approach of resolving it, in a very brief way.
Allow me to first possibly comment on the employment topic that Dr. Kohima brought up. When I was mentioning the problem, I thought, should I mention that or not? And I did not mention it because of the need to define it.
Okay.
If I'm just simply mention we have a problem with employment, or unemployment, it would immediately say that, or imply that we don't have enough jobs. The problem with the Egyptian context is not about enough jobs, but it's about the right jobs for the right pay scale. So you will always hear from business owners, from companies, that they lack the right skilled labor. And on the other hand, you will find labor saying, in its wider term, that they are not getting the fair and just salary and compensation for their work. So I think that's a big problem, but it requires a bit more of an economic intervention rather than an urban intervention. And this is why I did not refer to it immediately. When it comes to challenges that the urban context in Egypt would face, I think it would be different based on where you are. If you're in Cairo, I think the biggest problem would be how to revitalize the inner part of the city. The city has been growing over 14 centuries, and you can imagine that the agglomeration of Greater Cairo region until possibly 1995, that is an old fabric, an old structures, and with the succession of situations, regimes, and wars, and so on, that fabric requires some revitalization. When you have around 16 million living in that fabric, it's very hard to intervene while still satisfying everybody. Some very creative, innovative, and collaborative approaches in order to do that with the community, with the government, with the private sector. So it requires a new way of governance. So I think that's a big challenge in Greater Cairo region. If you talk to people in the north, for example, in Alexandria, they will tell you we have a problem of congestion because of limited land. They are bordered by the sea, by agricultural land, by water bodies, and that's it. So the high land value, and I know that would attract your attention, and of course the over-exploitation of the urban land. If you go to other places, you find the under-exploitation, the under-development, because it's away from the job opportunities, like in the North Coast. If you go in the Upper Egypt, in the south, you have a more complicated phenomena of poor communities, agricultural land, no industry, and so on and so forth.
Okay, we'll stop there. If I were to let Professor Salheen to go on, you see he's moved from Cairo to the sea, to agricultural land, so that's a practitioner, if you know what I'm talking about. And I do appreciate that, the land value issues. But even what I think is important that you also mentioned is where people are bothered by the sea, agricultural land, because people tend to forget that even in the Christian Bible, the Red Sea is always talked about, and always linked to Egypt. But then we tend to also discuss, the Suez Canal, there's so many, but we tend to discuss Egypt in social circles as if Egypt is just some dusty desert place, and people forget that there are these water bodies. So I just want to put that out there for the sake of, education or African issues. So, Dr. Keleg, can you also in a brief way pick out maybe one urban challenge and a solution?
Okay, I think maybe I go with climate change, health, and green spaces availability in a city, in a complex city like Cairo. I know climate change is a global issue, but also the local manifestations and how people deal with it on their daily life varies a lot across the globe. For Cairo, we have been facing high heat stress waves very frequently. Even now, we are still in the spring and the temperature is already 40, which wasn't expected at all, and we have been facing this greatly in the last years. So I think this is a major issue for us, but with dense areas, with high heat island effect and everything, and the loss of green spaces for other development needs associated with the economic pressures we are having, and high maintenance needs to actually maintain these green spaces in an arid climate. So I think all of these are connected also to respiratory disease and health issues among the public. And also no one speaks about the interconnectivity of these issues together, and this also adds to lack of awareness among, I would say, most of the stakeholders about the connectivity of these issues, and we shouldn't be dealing with this issue in silo. We should discuss it all in integration, how to integrate these, because it comes from different development sectors and different, Ministry of Health, maybe they should be included in such discussions, and also urban development sectors, and also sometimes mobility and transportation. So I think we need to discuss it more in an integrated way rather than doing it in silos, along with addressing the economic pressure of having green spaces in arid region. I think this is also crucial. It's not about just let's do the green, it's also about understanding that it's not that cheap for us to do greens as Europe. So we have to come up with our own solutions that fits our own context.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much. That's because you're talking about collaboration again, partnerships, more across sectors, and which Professor Salheen had mentioned within the context of revitalization in the city, and you living in the landscape. I love that. This is cool. And Dr. Kohima, in your situation, Sub-Saharan Africa particularly, what is the urban challenge, and what would be a solution?
Okay, so I think I will take housing, making housing available, affordable housing available as a challenge. And I will approach it in a different way, not just construction of mass housing and so on, but trying to sort of kill two birds with one stone and looking at infill development, because like a city like Windhoek, we've got a lot of open spaces that could take up that, but we know that such open spaces are usually seen as land banking for a potential potential profit, revenue generating development instead of housing, which is just for social. So I think infill development, making provisions and maybe policies, putting policies in place that speaks towards advocating for infill development. And that way we are also curbing the sprawl and maybe also making sure that we create a integrated space, because the housing need for most countries is on the low income end, much more greater than on the high income. So that can create a much more vibrant environment.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that. It also reflects the fact that, the entire Africa, we share a lot in common in terms of the urban problems. Perhaps there'll be differences in terms of priorities, but obviously we are dealing with the same issue. And that now leads me to a burning question, actually. It's politically, it is very common in literature that in Africa that we are divided. When it comes to scholarship, education, research, there's also that perception that we as scholars in the continent that we are divided. Now, I don't know to what extent this is true, but I can only speak, for myself. In my experience, I've not really had the opportunity of working, a lot of opportunity of working with people from across the other regions of Africa. And when I say other regions, it's not even only the north, but also within the Central African region where the language is also different. We come from Anglophone, and then you have the Francophone. So there's this issue of the Francophone, we're not working well with them, then where the Arabic is spoken, we're not also working well with them, and in general, we are seen to be working in silos. My experience is that I've had the opportunity of working with those scholars from those regions that I've come across, and it's been rewarding. But I also have to confess that I've not had the opportunities of working with a lot of them, unlike people from the other regions or the regions where I'm from. So I'd like to know that this perception that African scholars from the north and across the Sahara region, like myself, still work in silos and so engage in isolated ways in tackling the research issues in the continent. What's your perspective, in this direction, and what's your experience and opinion on this? Is it reality? And if it's reality, how do we go about it, or is your experience different?
Yeah, I do confirm. So simply, I do confirm that it's not only in silos, but if you think of the bilateral or binational cooperation, it would not be African immediately the first goal that you would think of, but you would think of African, European, African American, African Asian, as if we cannot learn from each other, as if we don't share same problems, we don't have solutions for each other, as if the solution can only come from the outside world. And I think this is something that you need first to get rid of. It's a genotype that has the phenotype of us not really communicating enough, not cooperating enough. Where in fact, I'm sure that African scholars can understand each other much more than they can understand Europeans, Americans, and the other way around. And we have solutions for each other because we have the same problem, we have the same, we've gone through historically very similar challenges, very similar ordeals, very similar dilemmas. And some of us, we found ways to do it, but these ways are not connected to provide a holistic solution. So each one of us is suffering from one pain. Maybe the other had that cured that pain, but there is no one overarching one solution for all. And I think the cooperation between African scholars should be encouraged, should be supported. The questions here comes from the funding. Who would be funding that cooperation?
Our colleagues, we should learn more about Africa, what's happening in the African scholarly of literature about this phenomena. Why would we always go to, literature coming from the north rather than seeing what's actually happening and what has been reported on in the South to understand more about similar contexts rather than always, borrowing from very different contexts on every scale, politically, climatically, socially, culturally, while we can relate more to the literature coming from the global South, and it can move us forward and ahead more rapidly than actually going to the global North, trying to accommodate and then contextualizing and then reaching solutions. While for Africa, I think we will cut down some time and some steps in reaching the same standpoint. So I think this is really, really crucial. And the other thing is that sometimes we do not publish about ourselves. And also series, we usually go to series from there and try to adapt rather than actually creating our own series about our own context. So I think this is also crucial, that African scholars should do more about theorizing from their context rather than adapting from what has been theorized from other contexts. This will also create more knowledge about us, knowledge about intercontinental knowledge about different countries. I don't know, from my personal experience myself, I just figured it out maybe in a revelation in 2019 that I haven't ever been to any African country, while I have been to many European countries. And I said, why is that? And since then I have been focusing on, no, I need to go to more African countries. And the first country I have been to was Kenya, and I attended a conference there, and it was amazing for me because I can see lots of similarities and commonalities every corner I go in the city, and I can see how it's very similar. Yes, very different cultural, a bit different cultural manifestation, but it's the same phenomena, and I can relate more to it. So,
I'll stop you there.
Yeah.
I mean, you all can see that if you were to leave her to keep going on in Africa, she's never going to stop. Yeah. Now she's moved from Cairo to Nairobi. So so I think the take home basically is that there's a burning desire for African scholars to work together, and perhaps funding and other impediments are what is stopping it, but it should be an individual responsibility for us to all work together. So please, if you're out there and you're an African scholar, get in touch with anyone from across the regions that you know and see if you can work together. But that said, still on the final question, I'll give Dr. Jennilee Kohima the chance to respond in regards to collaboration among Africans.
I think from me it will be very brief, because they have already exploded. So I will just say that the isolation might be because of a lack of trust in our own literature. Maybe it could be the reason that we don't have enough of our own resources out there, our own information. But even that which is out there, it's like you go there as a last resort. You will first try and find issues from around the world that speaks to that specific context in Africa before you actually go to Prof. Salheen's publication, or before you would want to collaborate with Prof. Salheen, you'll first go and look for a collaborator elsewhere. And I think, I'm not sure if I should say this, but it could also be maybe the funding bodies. Funding bodies target African countries and African partners, and that has maybe resulted in a sequel of perpetuated that tendency that European scholars or Northern scholars will seek African scholars for collaborations, and there is not really a call out there for African scholars to seek African scholars for collaborations. So maybe that's where the African Union could come in to birth that.
I appreciate that, and I know we're about to close. As you would see, I'm pushing for a close, but I want to say something. The viewers, I have an upcoming episode where I discuss the research status of Africa. And in that episode, I give a shout out to my colleagues in Egypt. Before you get to that episode, they are here. And there's a reason why I had to give a shout out to you and others, to the Egyptians, particularly Egyptians, South Africans, Nigerians. I have an experience that, I'm from Nigeria, as you all would know from previous podcasts, and there's this tendency of Nigerians are everywhere, and And when I meet Nigerian scholars, they tend to talk down on the Nigerian academic system. And then I keep asking, if it's so bad, why are you all over the place as lecturers, professors? And it's always a big argument. So I decided to do a podcast, which look forward to that, on the status of research in Africa. And I used SciMago websites that tracks research progress. From 1996 till date, it is Egypt first, South Africa second, Nigeria third. That's how these three countries share the spotlight in terms of first, second, third position in Africa. Most of the time, it's Egypt on top. Last year was Egypt. The year before it was Egypt. South Africa second, Nigeria third. Maybe a few times Nigeria moved to second, one or two times from. And then I compared it to the global ranking. Obviously, as Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria comes first in the global ranking, they also appear that way. However, Egypt will be number 34 globally, South Africa number 36, and Nigeria number 49. And then I turned around and I said, look, what's the problem? Because if we have to compete in Western education with the West, and in the world you still need to come up 34 position, 36 position, 49 position, then something definitely is good about research and education in Africa. But that's not to say that we don't have to work hard towards improving. So, viewers, I'm very happy that I have the guests today and we've been able to enjoy this very little period of discourse on educational research in Africa. And I want to call on everyone out there to please collaborate. And I want to thank my guests. But before that, I'd like to call on you. Tap down there, please. Subscribe to the podcast because I'll be bringing more guests and more discussions on Africa and beyond in related to academics and research. With that, I'd like to say thanks very much. But before that, I'll give my guests a last opportunity to say bye, maybe with one or two sentences. So with that, I'd like to start with Professor Salheen.
Yeah, maybe one other hat that I did not mention, I acted as an advisor to the Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research in Egypt for 3 consecutive ministers. And during that position, I attended several meetings. One of them was in the African Union in Addis Ababa. And we were discussing how we can foster and support and encourage and cooperation between our countries. And of course, the issue of the finance was on the table. And I made a very simple comment, come on, now we have internet, we have virtual reality, we have even virtual labs, we can exchange knowledge. We might not have enough financial resources, but we have knowledge. Knowledge that is extremely valuable, and we should make the best use of it. So I think with internet, with seminars, webinars, and these media platforms, we can really reinvent, re-explore what we have. And I think here comes a great potential for cooperation.
So thank you, Professor Salheen. The message is, if you can't collaborate physically, collaborate virtually. So there are options for doing this. Thanks. And Dr. Keleg, please, your last words.
It has been a pleasure being with you today, and I think we discussed a lot, and from my personal passion, I think we need to theorize more from Africa rather than just adopting theories from other parts of the world. Might be my last word for this podcast.
Thanks very much, I appreciate it. Dr. Kohima?
I think my last words are also to say thank you for inviting me onto this podcast, and I would like to remind the viewers to please subscribe, like, and comment.
I love that. Thanks very much for reminding the viewers. So please subscribe, comment, very, very important, because by commenting you join the conversation. With that said, I would like to thank all my guests, starting with Dr. Kohima.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming.